Hey guys, I just wanted to give you a quick update. Now, I'll be posting shortly the interview that me and Dave did last night with Al Mintz. Um, he's 87 years old, still has a very sharp memory. There were a couple of things that maybe got slightly wrong or confused on, but for the most part, it was incredible. He also tells this crazy story that Dave had never heard before. He hadn't told him before about what happened when I'm not sure what year it was, would have been the late 70s. And was pretty much alone fighting the child predators and child pornography that was rampant in Providence and was being protected by very powerful people. So at the time, there were no child pornography laws. It was just regular obscenity laws. And there was a lot of debate about what constituted a crime and what didn't. And so there was an adult bookstore that was literally only a block or two from the courthouse. And one of the recent rulings at that time was that a judge could determine whether something was pornographic based on whether it had any possible social merit they'd be looking at. So when that ruling came out, Detective Mintz pulled his squad car up in front of the adult bookstore, went inside, and found a book that they were selling right out in the open that was all child porn. So he said to the owner of the store, or whoever was working the counter, he said, "You mind if I take this to the judge, do you?" And the guy didn't put up a fight. So Al walked out the car, and before he even got into his squad car, all hell was breaking loose. So I'll let you watch the episode so you can hear that story from Al himself, because it's really revealing about what might be going on, or certainly what was going on back then. But other than that, one of the, like I said, hunting, the idea of this series we've been doing, Outer Demons, and the main thesis of Dave's book and Melanie Perkins' theory is that a lot of these predators were working together as accomplices and possibly were creating content, and that's why they were protected by powerful institutions. But the evidence is elusive. I'm not sure. When Melanie first told me about it, I was beyond skeptical. Then reading Dave's book, I was much less skeptical, but I'm still skeptical. I don't know what the truth is. And you'll find one piece of evidence that makes you say, no, there's not much here. And then you'll see something else that says, maybe there is something here. So really, the documentary, well, for now, the podcast series, Outer Demons, that's the beginning for it. But then we're going to be shooting a documentary that begins this July. And the idea is really, it's a quest to find out what the truth is on this. But not only what is the truth, but a real heart of the series is Dave's truth, because he's lived this. It's extremely personal to him, and a little bit things are coming out, but it's not only was he an abuse victim, but he may have been connected. Some of the guys that were abusing him may have been connected to these people further back. And so, the heart of the series is really Dave's truth and his quest for justice. He's in law enforcement now, so he spends all day doing other cases. And then he comes home exhausted, and he's got a wonderful family. He's got 2 boys, his wife's a nurse. But then he's also still pursuing this research full time because he's driven to get to the truth on it. So I want to follow him in this quest, and our quest as a community is to hopefully go along with him. So we're going to keep appealing for your help. Anybody that wants to join us, obviously it helps if you're watching the channel. That helps a lot. And just leaving a comment of support, say, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I don't know what the truth is either, but good luck. And especially to Dave. Dave, God bless you, and keep working on it. But we also, anybody else who wants to join our team in general, we need researchers. We need people that want to do social media. For the first shoots that we got scheduled in late July, we want to get as many cameras on the subjects as possible, because we have a camera crew, but things come up where your camera's only focused on one person at a time. And there are times where you have to stop to recharge it or to change the tape. So we want to get things from as many angles as possible. We'll be shooting on a few locations. So anybody that is willing to join us, we've already had a couple people I talked to a woman named Joyce who's going to be signing up with us. But anybody else who's interested in that and helping us in any way at all, just reach out. This is our focus now, but there'll be other cases that we'll be on. And we have some fantastic interviews shaping up. And if somebody out there really is saying, you know what, I think I can do a better podcast show than this guy on the glass with his glasses sitting up there. Well, okay, come on with us. I mean, I don't have a need to be up here myself talking about it. I welcome partners. I'm happy to have somebody else take over for me or do some other aspect of the story. If your dream was to always, it was not my dream to podcast. I just kind of ended up doing it because I can talk about these subjects myself. It's better than scripting it out. I was scripting it out and giving it to other readers, but they weren't absorbed in the information the way I was. So it was easier. It became easier for me to just talk about it. But if you guys think you could do better, you probably can. So come on with me. Come on with us. You know, we'll find a role for you. We'll get you set up. We'll help you learn how to use your equipment and the right software and use some tools that'll make your voice sound really good, like Joe Rogan or I'm not sure. I can't think if a lot of women are into this, especially young women. So, you know, we're willing to help whatever we can do. We want you on board. Now, I got someone on the channel mentioned a case to me today, which I was unfamiliar with. So his name is Jeff Jones. Thank you very much, Jeff. And I looked into this case, and you know, these are things that I avoided always in the past. I hate anything that involves kids. So a lot of these things that you guys might know about, I don't. But this was really an incredible case. So I think we want to do more on it. And I'm going to just talk about it a little bit here in case you guys might know more about it. Comment below if you do. So this was the disappearance of Johnny Gosch. And this was in 1982 in Des Moines, Iowa. And he was the first of at least 3 paper boys that disappeared or were abducted in a short period of time. But this case has everything you want and everything that troubles us in looking at this stuff. It has the problems. It has the intrigue. It has the false leads. I mean, you know, it's the problem when you end up going down so many dark rabbit holes in this stuff. So it was a Sunday, September 5th, 1982, in a suburb of Des Moines. He's 12 years old. He left home before dawn to begin his paper route. It was customary. So they had to go meet. There must have been a central location where they went down, and he had a wagon with him. And I remember myself, I was a paper boy at that exact same time in Massachusetts, and the Sunday paper was a bitch. I mean, because the thing was, now it's like that big with today's publishing industry, news publishing industry. But back then, each paper was like this. I mean, it was crazy. So for my paper route, I didn't have a wagon, but I used to divide my route up into 3 pieces, and I had kind of a clover, and I'd come back to my house and load up more into my bag. And I think to this day, I ended up with scoliosis in one shoulder, my spine. Well, scoliosis in my spine, and went to let one shoulder being lowered because these papers were so heavy. So anyways, really the exact same time that I was doing my paper route, unbeknownst to me, in Des Moines, they're targeting and kidnapping boys, and that are never found again. So it's horrifying. So now apparently the way they did it there, he must have had to take his wagon to a central location or a hub where the papers were dropped off, and there'd be other boys there, because he was seen by other boys picking up his newspapers, and he did pick them up. So now there was, let me take these off so I can read this better. So another paper boy reported that he observed Gosch talking to a stocky man in a blue 2-tone car near the paper drop. I mean, the first thing that strikes me is that just last week we were looking into those cases in Oakland County, Detroit, which is Detroit, Michigan, and those cases also connected to Ohio. So these are all. So if you start reaching out to Iowa, that's a pretty far leap. But the car that was suspected to be involved in that was a blue Gremlin, and it had kind of a stripe that went across the middle, like a racing car stripe or something like that, which when you look at the picture, really kind of, I could see where someone might remember that as a 2-tone car, because it does have 2 colors. So that's a little bit different, but it also blue. And that car was later found buried in You know what? I think it might have been in Iowa, which here we are in Iowa. I have to go back and look at this case now. It was found buried. Now, who buries a car? You don't bury a car unless you don't want it to be found because it's got something suspicious going on in it. So I wonder, I can't help wondering if it's somehow connected to this case. So, so there was apparently a stocky man who asked him for directions. And in fact, at one point, Gosch went up to a friend and said, "Hey, this guy's looking for directions," and the friend thought there was something strange about it. So, in fact, the friend also looked at the license plate, but he couldn't remember it. So then later, they used hypnosis therapy to try to see if they could get him to help recall him with the plate number. And apparently they got some kind of number out of it. I don't know. This was we saw this we'll see this more in detail in the Andy Puglisi case. So, and it was right around the same time. Well, Andy Puglisi disappeared in 76, but it was right around the same time, around 82 or 83. It might have even been 82, the exact same time, where a Lawrence cop flew down to Texas to attend a seminar on hypnosis regression to be used for the same thing. And he comes back to Lawrence. Now, he connected with a psychic down there. That's a whole other crazy story. And he comes back to Lawrence. Now, right around that same time, a 10-year-old boy comes forward to say that he was with Andy when he was abducted. At the time, the boy would have been 4, and that he got away. And I'm not sure, but I know for a fact that he was the main cop that was called to interview this boy who was now 10, was the same cop who had gone down and attempted to learn this hypnosis therapy. So did he use this on this young boy I think his name was Ray? How reliable was that? This was not a psychologist. This is just a cop. I don't know. So it's funny how all these things are happening in the same time. So they searched the neighborhood around 6 a.m. They called the police. The police response here was, sadly, I'm not anti-law enforcement at all. And I've known and met many heroic cops that I know just take this stuff home and it eats them up. And I'm going to have some on the channel coming up soon. We'll be doing some interviews with a guy named Tommy Daly. He's going to be scheduling some other law enforcement officials. He's a former detective himself. So the police initially believed they were slow to respond. They wouldn't put out an official thing until it was back then. You had to have a 72-hour waiting period before someone was officially considered missing. And they determined that they believed he was a runaway. Now, later on, they changed that, but how much time was lost? We now know time is everything. So I don't know what Des Moines is like. I don't know how busy those guys are. It's always in any situation historically or a crime case, you have to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else at that time. So I don't know why they thought that, but there seemed to be, once you start witnessing other paper boys, he went and picked up his papers. He took his little dog with him. It doesn't say in the article anything about the dog. I assume they found the dog and they found his wagon with the papers in him. That doesn't sound like a runaway. It just boggles the mind. So the parents, and particularly the mother, stayed on this for many, many years, and she hired private investigators. And here's also where the story starts to get a little crazy. And my heart goes out to the mother, because your mother, you're going to cling to any hope, anything that gives you hope that your son is still alive. So, and there are people that are out there that are going to try to take advantage of that. So in 1985, she got a letter from someone who said they were connected to a biker gang, and that he knew that her son was taken into a large child slavery ring operated by that biker club. And he naturally requested money. He asked for $11,000. She gave him the $11,000. And then he requested more, $100,000. He was arrested in Buffalo by the FBI and was charged with fraud. So he looks to have been someone that was just trying to take advantage of the situation. But the mother still believes he was telling the truth. So he stated that Gosch was sold to a man who Meyer identified as a high-level drug dealer residing in Mexico City. So she believed him, and whether that's just desperation or, I mean, it seems to me like he was probably just a guy that knew about the case and was trying to make money off her, but, who knows? Now, there's more. So at 2:30 a.m., all right, so this is it. I'm sorry. He was kidnapped in 1982. He was 12 years old. In March of 1997. So at that point, he would be, that's 15 years, right? So he'd be 27 years old. At 2:30 a.m., there was a knock at the door, and waiting outside was a young man who claimed to be Johnny Gosch, and he was accompanied by an unidentified man. So according to his mother, she immediately recognized him, and then just to make sure, he opened his shirt to show her a birthmark on his chest that he was known to have. Now, I believe that birthmark had been publicly revealed about the case, so it's possible an imposter could have known about it. So according to the mother, they talked for an hour and a half, and he was with this other man. She had no idea who he was, but Johnny seemed to be looking over to him whenever he wanted to talk or wasn't sure whether he can answer a question. He didn't say where he was living or where he was going, but he said, let's see, he had shoulder-length long hair at the time. His hair was dyed black. All right, so he said that he had been abducted by a pedophile ring and that he couldn't stay because he was afraid for his life and afraid for her, that powerful people. He didn't, as far as I can tell, he didn't ask her for anything or any money or anything, and he doesn't seem to have ever come back. Yeah, let's see. She said that her son told her that he had been the victim of a pedophile organization and had been cast aside when he was too old, but subsequently feared for his life and lived under an assumed identity, feeling it was not safe to return home. So, this could have been someone taking advantage of her, pretending to be the son. I don't know. Who could, maybe you guys will have some more information on that. There was another thing that came up. So in September of 2006, someone left 4 photographs on her front door, some of which she posted on her website. One was a color photo showing 3 boys bound and gagged. She says that a black and white photo appears to show her 12-year-old son, and he was mouth gagged, his hands and feet were tied up, and he had some kind of, it says, a human brand on his shoulder. A third photo shows a man possibly dead who may have had something tied around his neck. The mother said that the man was one of the perpetrators who molested his son. I don't know how she knows that, and I don't know why he's dead. I don't get it. Later on, some Florida investigators looked at least one of those photos and said it was not what she thought it was, that it actually was dated back to 1979, with a couple of years before Gosch went missing, and that it involved just boys playing a boyhood game of tying each other up and seeing who could escape first, and that nobody was molested and nothing unusual happened. But the mother still believes that at least one of those photos had her son in it. So, I don't know. Once you start going down these rabbit holes, you just don't know, because there are some. So, for instance, I started looking into one of the private investigators she brought in was a guy named Jim Rothstein, who was famous as a New York police investigator in the 70s, who was involved with a lot of cases, including Uncle Sam. But then after he retired, he became a private detective that you could hire. And when I looked, and I did a little research, and I found out that his specialization was, he had a lot of theories and supposed evidence about kids being abducted by satanic cults. Now, anytime I see satanic cult, I tend to be like, that's just kind of conspiracy theory fiction stuff. And I still think that, but I mean, I'm open to any idea about organizations. So some of you guys out there may have different feelings on that. I just remember growing up in the 80s that there was a lot of crazy fear about satanic cults. You play your, I went to Catholic school, and at one point there was a priest talking about if you play a rock album backwards, it's got satanic messages in it. And as an example, he took out a Led Zeppelin album and played it backward for us in front of the class. I mean, they were really trying to scare kids. I think the priest believed it. Of course, he should have been investigating his own church if he really wanted to find the pedophiles or the satanic people, I think. But that's another topic. But, I don't know, satanic cult. I remember also there was at some point there was supposedly official FBI officials or official data that was saying there are, I don't remember the number, I'm going to make this up, but there are like 40,000 children that go missing in the United States every year, and made it seem like there was this huge abduction phenomenon. And I remember when I used to hear that stuff, I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. I mean, every time a kid goes missing, there's always a big media explosion about it. Just like the one that was part of my life. I didn't know him, but Andy went missing. I was the same age as him in 1976, and the town went crazy. So to me, I'm like, this kind of thing it didn't make sense to me. There'd be thousands of these. And subsequently, my understanding is that data has been completely debunked, that most of it was based on reports of runaways or someone that maybe went with their other parent or something, custody cases and stuff like that. And eventually the child was found. So, even just looking at the cases that we've been talking about in the 70s, I think it looks like maybe more like one, like in the state of Massachusetts, that maybe it might be more like one a year back in the 70s. I can't see it being much more than that. So this idea of these cults that are taking massive amounts of kids, I just don't think it happens. But that doesn't mean there aren't things out there where, especially if you don't need massive amounts, you just need some kids in order to make a film, in order to get some pictures or do something else, or you have a really expensive, a really wealthy client that wants that, like this reported figure in Mexico. He may not be real, but there could be real people out there that do that want those kind of things. I don't know. But for me, all of this, I want to know the evidence. As in any of these cases, you see me following the Karen Reed case, I don't take a side because I haven't seen convincing evidence. It seems to me very possible that Karen Reed is being framed, but the deeper you look into it, it just involves a level of conspiracy that just seems almost impossible that someone wouldn't break and talk. So, but yet there are an incredible amount of strange things going on the state side. So, you can't help looking at that. No, so I take the same approach to all these cases. I took it to the Lizzie Borden case. Everybody is either convinced that Lizzie did it or she didn't. Well, I took the approach, I want to go back and read all the evidence I can find. I want to read. So I went over all of the trial evidence. I went over the inquest testimony evidence. And then I also went over, you can get the interviews and evidence from people that were not included in the trial or not submitted as evidence by either side. And there was hundreds of pages of documents for that. I read it all. Doesn't mean I mastered it all because it's an enormous amount of material. So you just kind of read through quickly and form impressions and take what notes that you can and try to think it through. And in my series, that was my process of trying to think it through. It wasn't so much trying to say she did it or didn't do it, but that there were angles that were being missed. And there's evidence there were narratives that become accepted in these cases that people take as general truths or truth about, and they aren't accurate. And they don't hold up to evidence. I put out, so I want to go over soon, I won't in this episode, but The Man from the Train, and just an incredible book. I recommend it, by Bill James. It talks about a series of axe murders that took place mostly in a period around like from 1908 to say 1912, but he traces it back to much earlier. I think the first one that he found that he connects to it, he actually comes up with a solid suspect, was in 1899 in Massachusetts, for you massholes like me. But one of the things you saw in this, it was that the same thing then as now is that people rush to narratives in a town and they end up putting someone in jail that shouldn't be in jail. And when this happens, you'll get people coming out of the woodwork to say, I saw that. And when years later, and they weren't even close to having DNA type evidence back then, but years later, something would come out and you'd say, no, it wasn't that. That narrative was wrong. That person is in jail for no reason. And then you go back and say, well, how did his neighbor see this? And how did someone else in town see that? Were they lying? They might have been. But I think what happens in a lot of these cases here is people just kind of get swept up in events, and some people want to be part of events. So they kind of make something up, and maybe their mind seizes on some little detail that has a kernel of truth to it. And over time, it grows. And when I say over time, it could be weeks, months, and under questioning by police. And you want to please the police, or you want to please the local newspaper. That little false memory starts to form more and something more concrete. And eventually, that person remembers it as though it actually happened, but it didn't happen. And I think this is a big problem with eyewitness testimony. So eyewitness testimony for me that isn't backed up by multiple eyewitnesses or backed up by physical evidence is always going to be suspect. And in this book, The Man from the Train, we just saw a ton of that. So I'm very skeptical about it. So, but back to this case here, the quest of this series, please check it out, Outer Demons. Get in touch with us if you want to help out in any way. We really appreciate having you on board. And, I've become very good friends with Dave, and I can't believe what he's been through in his life and the man that he ended up becoming despite all that. Because you'll see all these cases where a child suffers that level of abuse and they end up broken for life. And they end up, drug addicts, addicted to alcohol, petty thieves. Dave's father was in jail for, I think, 8 years while he was a boy. His father was a Vietnam veteran, heroic guy that loved his country, but came home addicted to alcohol because of his experience and tormented by some very difficult memories. And so he was a troubled guy. And then the mother, I don't know her story, but Dave, has said she was a drug addict. And this is how he ended up in a situation of being abused, because she was vulnerable and didn't know what was going on. But so Dave had to go through all this in his formative years. How he didn't come out addicted to drugs and alcohol or a petty thief, I don't know. But I guess part of it was he did maintain a good relationship with his parents, and his dad instilled in him, after his dad, cleaned up, instilled in him his values of patriotism and service to the community. And so Dave went on to be I'm not sure if he was in the Marines. I think he was in the Army. And he served in Afghanistan. You can see clips of him interviewed on NBC News. He was in combat in some very difficult situations. He's hard of hearing now for that reason, because of a lot of the munitions that were exploded. A lot of veterans like that end up with hearing loss and a lot of damage that way. So he's come out of all that and gone into law enforcement. And the guy's working a lot of hours in that because there's a lot of overtime that comes on. So he's working every day with state cops and local police and doing a lot of hard work, and he's still pursuing this on the side. So to me, that's the story. And so if you guys can come on the channel every once in a while and just leave a comment and saying, Dave, God bless you. Thank you for all you've done for serving your country, and good luck with everything you're doing now, and just support him. I think stuff like that means a lot to him. And that's a big reason why I want to stick with doing this. When we have the documentary that we're going to do our first shoots in July, I have my friend Tom Fleming, who was in broadcasting and is in as part of a small company that films and creates, edits media. So he's going to lead the film crew, but it's a small crew, so we need help. And we've had some other people joining up with us. We have a researcher coming on board. So really, anything that if you want to support us, if you think this is a worthy cause, going after monsters, and I've got a video coming out too. I want to talk about why I think there's a role for citizens in pursuing true crime cases like this, because I do believe, as much as I support law enforcement, and I think most of these guys are good guys, I've known a lot of them, there's an issue with law enforcement not being able to pursue these cases. And we talk about it in the interview with Al Mintz too, because I think these law enforcement guys, so, even just looking here at this case with the Gosch kid, one of the reasons they believed that he was a runaway was because they couldn't find a motive. This is the problem. And I've talked about this in other cases. If you're a sexual predator, that's your motive. Okay, now if somebody was abducting these kids for money, in order to bring them to someone else, well, that's different. Then there is a motive. But you don't have it's a normal motive when you're a serial killer, because you're doing what you want to do. You've lived a fantasy. You've developed a fantasy about killing people, and you're obsessed with that fantasy, and you're killing someone not because you want to make money, not because you want to clear your name or get revenge. Those are the usual motives that police look for. Serial killers and child predators do not have those kind of motives. Those are the normal motives that police see when they're chasing, when they're trying to solve cases. And they go out, you understand it, like, okay, what's the means and motive? And you go out there, who had access to the crime scene? And what was their motive? That's how they start. That's their mindset. And every day they're going over cases like this. So it makes sense. But then when you see a kid that's just taken off his bike or taken away from off his paper route, or in any case, someone tricks him into the woods, and he just disappears, and police don't know how to operate, because they don't know that these kind of monsters exist out there. They haven't investigated them. And that's why I think that the public has an important role. These videos have a role. Documentaries have a role. Melanie's Emmy Award-winning documentary, Have You Seen Andy? I'd like to see Melanie take it the next step and go into more about studying. Melanie's done tremendous work in keeping some of those predators off the street by exposing them. For instance, I'm understanding she went to trials, but she went to court hearings several times to keep Wayne Chapman off the street. I think Dave did too. And they were working separately, independently, but they both did that. And that was great. And she unearthed some predators that history had forgotten, was not really aware of. One of the top ones we've talked about is Charlie Pierce, who seems to have been killing and abducting kids for 25, 30 years over a large swath of territory, because he was a carny and he was traveling from Florida to Chicago to Massachusetts and all points in between. And his obsession was having sex with corpses. So, and then he's arrested. Well, he's arrested for raping 2 boys down in Florida. I don't know why he didn't kill them. The boys must have escaped or something. But and then in jail, he eventually confesses to murdering a young girl in Massachusetts, not far from where I am, in Boxer, Massachusetts. Why did he confess? Who really knows? But this guy, it was certainly, we don't know what it was, but it was not remorse. This guy was a monster until the end. But so Melanie did a fantastic, he was forgotten until Melanie unearthed him. Even the Lawrence police had no interest in him, and that it did, they just, Lawrence is a crime-ridden city, so Lawrence Police Department is very small. So I just think that they didn't have time to pursue a lot of these cases. But so this is, you look in this Gosch case, they start out, where's the motive? There was no motive. The motive was, guy's a pervert and he wants to abduct a kid and do something to him. That's not a normal motive. You can't break it down that way. And that's my fear, is that police don't understand this. So what we really need is a really good documentary that really gets out there widely. And I don't know what Melanie's working on now. Hopefully that's part of her goal. Hopefully she'll come on with us and maybe we can all do it together. And the more of you guys that come on with us, I know the more that will maybe encourage Melanie to come with us too. I've spoken to Melanie a few times on the phone. She's now working a little bit again with Dave. Melanie's one of those people that kind of guards her secrets. I don't know. So it'd be good if she would work with us. I don't want her to think it's a competitive thing that we're competing with her, because we're not. We want to support her work and people like her. I understand, not without really knowing Melanie, I can understand a little bit just knowing her history, because Melanie, grew up in the projects, and then at some point, so then Andy went missing when Melanie was 9 and Andy was 10. And then maybe, a couple years after that, her mother finally went into the depths of alcoholism, And so Melanie was taken from her family and taken from the project. But I think she ended up, I don't know the full story, but she ended up in a much better situation. She grew up, went to school, did well, went to college, and eventually started working a career in the documentary industry. She was working for the American Experience and PBS and NPR, stuff like that. And when she hit the age of 30, obviously the Andy case had been kind of dogging at the back of her mind all her life. And in Lawrence, you'd see things come up every few years, such as the thing with the psychic and digs that they would try to do, and all kinds of false stuff. And I think Melanie finally just said, I've got to take this into my own hands. And now I have the connections and the production experience. So now's the right time to do it. So she started her own quest to solve the case. She set up a mailbox, a public box where people could send in clues and tips. And I don't remember the whole process, and I wasn't living around here at the time, so I'm not really sure. But she did eventually start unearthing a whole lot of information, and she went to the police, and I think the police supported her. She worked with Lawrence police. She worked with other local police departments. She worked with the state police. She seems to have got a lot of support from the state police. So, thank God for that. But a lot of this stuff she kind of unearthed on her own. Now, when I talked to her a few weeks ago, she said she has a lot of new material. So now Melanie went on to make that documentary, and she won an Emmy for it. And it's still on HBO. It's called Have You Seen Andy, if you want to check it out. So here you have a kid that started out in the projects, then made something of herself, and then won an Emmy for a documentary. But to my knowledge, she hasn't published anything since. And that documentary was, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years ago. So I can understand why she guards her secrets. It's really, from that perspective, I mean, as someone who's a writer, I can tell you that once you hit something, that you get a little bit of success, and then you think all of a sudden it's going to open all kinds of new doors and everything's going to be different. You work so hard to get to that point where you have a little bit of success that when you finally have it, you're like, all right, good. Now I'm going to be able to have a career out of this, or I'm going to be able to get my message out or my stories out. And it ain't that easy. So even once you get a little sign of success, the road doesn't necessarily get easier. And sometimes things dry up and doors close. And this is a common experience for screenwriters, novelists. A lot of novelists, they get they're one-hit wonders. They get one and has success, and they can't do anything after that. Screenwriters will go out and they'll sell a screenplay for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you'll see that they never sell anything again. So it's really, really difficult. So I know without speaking about this particular subject with Melanie, I can only imagine that there must be a real desire to get back in the game and get the story out, get whatever new stuff she has out there. And I think that so I can understand that feeling, and I hope that she's able to do it. And I wish her well. And I would, whatever she does come out with, we'll support it completely on the channel. We'll say, hey, please go see Melanie's thing. But at the same time, I think it'd be good if she worked a little bit closer with us or with Dave. It's better for people working together to try to get this story out there. Just, come on our channel, talk to us for a half hour. And I think I'm hoping to get her there with us when we do the shoot in in Lawrence. I know Dave will be there. And this is where the key part of Melanie's documentary was, because that's where they excavated. And I went down there a couple of months ago, and the excavation is still there because they didn't fill it in. It's just all grown over. It's really a unique spot, this location, where Andy probably disappeared into, because you look at a map and you think, oh, you're right in the middle of the city. There's no way it's secluded. But then when you get there, you realize just how isolated and secluded it is. It's actually, in a strange way, peaceful, but horrific when you know what might have happened there. And not only to Andy, but the year before, to the two boys that Wayne Chapman took back into the woods and raped. So we're hoping to have Melanie there with us when we film that. But everybody's support on the channel really means everything to these kind of investigators that are looking into this, because the main thing, I know in Dave's case, his only motivation is getting to the truth. and bringing justice to some of these creeps. He has his own career. He doesn't need, his career is in law enforcement. His career is not in entertainment or documentary making or anything like that. Or even in writing, even though he's published a book and he has a new book coming out soon. His main thing is just trying to solve these cases, trying to get to the bottom of it and try to bring justice to some of the guys that were probably connected to people that abused him when he was a kid. So this is what we want to try to get to the bottom of, and anything you guys can do to help us would be tremendously appreciated. So for that, I say good night, and I will publish this, and or good morning. You heard Harry in the background. He almost made an appearance. If he was over here, he was popular when I put him on a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to publish this, and right around the same time, I'll put up the interview with Al Mintz, who's a very special and incredible guy. The interview was where Al is. He's in Jacksonville, Florida. He's 87. He set it up himself. It's dark in there, so you can see him. You don't see him as well as you want to. It's not like having him in a studio. But this guy was a really special guy. So it was a real privilege to just be online a little bit with him. Okay, guys, have a great day. Thank you very much.